All right. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Roundtable podcast. And I should say our much anticipated or unanticipated return, as it were, of our podcast, depending on how you look at it. I am one of your co-hosts, Sam Whitfield, here in South Florida, and this is going to be our post election, our post midterm election special. And I'm just going to allow the co-host to introduce themselves. So whoever wants to go first, and then we'll jump right into it.
Well, I'm Adam Hill. I'm one of the editors and co-founders of American Watchmen.
I'm Joshua Johnson. I'm one of the fellow co-founders of American Watchmen and our resident radical.
And I'm Gabe Icaboni, also one of the co-founders of American Watchmen.
And I would just say that, Josh, I'm not sure that you're the only resident radical. Some of my Facebook friends have told me that I've gotten a little more radical for their taste. But anyway, with all that aside, this is our 2018 midterm election post-analysis. Lots to cover here on this podcast. Me personally, I did a 3-part kind of story arc, I guess, if you could call it that, for the 2018 midterms on my own podcast, The Whitfield Report. So, I won't be talking too much about the election myself here, but, gentlemen, I haven't seen you in a few weeks, so just, in general, what do you guys make of how the midterms turned out? Were you satisfied? Were there any states that you were particularly worried about that went well? Vice versa, were there any states that you thought would go well that didn't go well? And, most importantly, what did you guys think of those recounts that we had?
Are you laughing, Gabe?
Oh, I'm just laughing. All I can say is power to Broward County.
All I can say in response to that, Josh, is or to Gabe, is I am not a Florida native, so while I would like to apologize on behalf of the state of Florida for our fuck ups in terms of elections, I'm not sure I can because like I said, I'm not a native, so I'm not responsible for all this recount shit. It was just as agonizing for me as it was for the rest of you guys.
I will just say that I have finally. It seems like my long-awaited realignment is starting to pick up steam. So I was satisfied overall.
Okay. I mean, I would ask. Maybe we have time. I'll ask you to elaborate on that. But I don't know, Adam. What were your thoughts? I take it by your silence that Colorado did not do too well this midterm.
No, Colorado as a state legislator went completely solid blue. I mean, granted, we still have a lot of Republicans in office, but the majority in the House, the majority in the Senate, and all the top leadership is all blue now. So,
to be fair, half of your voters in your state are probably stoned, Adam. So,
yeah. I do want to say real quick that as a Colorado native, just like Adam, I will, and I said this on my own podcast. It's very sad to me, because when I was growing up in the 90s and early 2000s, and I'm sure, Adam, you can relate to this. I remember a time when Colorado was in fact like pretty solid red. And then, like, right around the time I got into middle school, it started going purple-ish, kind of. And then by the time I graduated high school, like, it was heading, to more or less deep blue pretty quickly. So,
I'm not I'm not too scared about anything because a couple years ago, when Colorado passed all those massive gun control legislations, we actually got a petition together and have two of the state senators removed from office. So I'm not. Well, we're gonna fight.
But I mean, you guys do have one of the most radical, people, Jared Polis, as the governor now. He's not my governor anymore. That's all I can say. So good. So good luck to you guys. That's all I can say.
He's not going to do anything.
You sound depressed, Adam. I can hear it in your voice.
Oh, no. It's not that. I've lost my voice over the last couple of days.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. I was gonna say, man, Adam really took this election hard. So, but anyway, at Josh and Adam, I mean, and Gabe, I was noticing that you guys were complimenting my state senator this evening on Facebook, and all I can say is, yes, Gabe, Rick Scott does know how to win elections. So
3 in a row by less than a point, by no more than like a point and a half.
Can I tell you something? This was almost, but not quite as nerve-wracking for me as the presidential election in 2016. I always like to joke that election, if you're a Republican, election night in Florida is pretty much like where you can get your cardio in simply by sitting down and watching TV. So
it's kind of a funny side note. I saw a thing on Facebook today that said the recount results in Florida are in. Al Gore declared president.
They found those hanging chats.
Well, I mean, we joke, but it does go to show that Florida has had the same problems with recounts that they have since the year, 2000. So what? Literally 18 years now. We've had the same problem in the state, and it always seems to be Broward, and like I'm surprised that Miami-Dade wasn't involved in this, because from what I've heard, again, I'm not a native, but from what I've heard from some of the people who, have been natives or who have lived here, like usually Miami-Dade is one of these counties that can't get their crap together either. So, I guess, I don't know. For me personally, and I don't want to go too much of what I've said already, but I would just say I felt pure relief when I found out that Ron DeSantis was going to be our governor, and relief when I found out that Rick Scott would be senator. That's really the first adjective that would come to mind for me.
Well, I think the thing with Florida with Scott winning Florida is, I think it's indicative that you can't really call this a wave, because waves, and this sort of ties in, Josh, with your realignment, is waves have historically always gone in one direction. So close races always fall in the same way, but you have Arizona going blue, and then you have Florida going red, which is, if it's a wave election and a wave is tipping everything one way, then obviously something is pushing back against that wave. And I would argue it's because the electoral map has changed. Things like demographics and education and those variables are actually becoming more important than historically what we've seen in past elections.
I would argue, I think I might have said this on the last podcast or a couple podcasts ago when we were talking about Kavanaugh, but I know for sure I've said on my own podcast, I think that Kavanaugh was a big factor in getting the Republican base out there to vote in the midterms. After the witch hunt that the Democrats put Kavanaugh through, I think that really motivated the Republican and conservative base to get out there in a way that, okay, let's say that the whole Kavanaugh, witch trial never happened. The Democrats could have very easily gone the other way. This election, especially in states like Florida, I think the fact that Kavanaugh, that the Dems tried to make an example of Kavanaugh, well, the Republicans, were motivated and mobilized, which again, I'm not, that was great, but they should have been mobilized anyway. And so, yeah, you're right. I don't think it was as much of a blue wave, but then again, as much of a red wave. But then again, I mean, I don't know. The blue wave obviously didn't happen either. I think it was more like both sides kind of trickled in barely, if you can.
Well, I think the thing that gets missed with Kavanaugh is I think Kavanaugh motivated the traditional conservative grassroots base to turn out. So I think it made the difference in states like, say, Indiana or Missouri, and it probably helped in Florida in the Panhandle getting conservatives out to vote. But I honestly don't think the Kavanaugh situation made a difference in a lot of races that the GOP won or lost, like Ohio. I don't think it really made a difference in Ohio. I think Ohio is just naturally becoming a Republican state because of what the Democrats have done and because of the turn the GOP is taking. So I agree to a point, and then I think the Kavanaugh thing is a little bit overblown. I think it helped, but I also think it hurt too, especially in the House and the suburbs. And then in some places, I don't really think it made a difference.
Well, I think
that's the sound of you agreeing with me on something, Gabe. The direction the GOP is turning.
Oh, I agree with you. I just don't know if it's the best course for the party to go.
I guess time will tell.
That's true.
Yeah. I'll let Sam go, and then maybe we can hit on my because I think, Gabe, you knew I was wanting to rant a little bit about Wisconsin.
I'm trying to give you a lead in, Josh.
well, no.
I don't want to talk too much because I know we're limited tonight. But
well, no. I mean, now that Josh is talking, you've got me serious. You've got me curious. Okay, and just to make this clear for our listeners who don't know my own podcast, The Whitfield Report, shameless plug, I know, but I've literally done a 3-part episode arc on that show about the election, about the midterm election. So I mean, I've pretty much said everything I've wanted to, and perhaps a bit more than I should have about the midterms. So with that in mind, Josh, I am kind of curious what your whole theory is. The only thing I'll say in regards to the House is I'm not really surprised we lost it, because traditionally, at least from what I've seen, the party that is usually in power of the executive, in charge of the executive branch, usually loses. I can't speak. Usually loses the House. And all in all, I think we did better than expected. We certainly did better than I expected, at least.
Well, I'll put my theory to you this way, Sam. Do you remember demographics is destiny? Except the Democrats were always using it with reference to race. The gigantic pink elephant in the room that they seem to have missed is the, as Gabe kind of mentioned earlier, is the growing education gap and income gap and, for lack of a better word, class gap that we're seeing with voters. And so you have the working classes who are increasingly less and less enchanted with the Democratic Party that's completely willing to go along with the neoliberal project so long as the people that are pushing it are woke on certain social issues. Ocasio-Cortez is a perfect example in New York because she lost all the poorer, blacker suburbs and managed to win, not the suburbs, the the what's the word?
Burrows.
Huh?
Burrows
Boroughs.
is what they're called up there.
She lost the boroughs, but she won the white suburbs. And demographics is destiny, except it's not quite the way the Dems thought it's going to be. What you're seeing is a wealthier, more educated Democratic base, increasingly pulling the party in a socially leftward direction and ignoring their so-called working class credentials. And you're seeing a Republican Party that is being pulled by its less affluent base in a more populist direction on economic issues and a more solidly culturally conservative direction on social issues. So that's my whole theory, Sam. In short, is essentially that the GOP is becoming a workers' party.
Well, okay, you and I actually have pretty similar theories. My theory is that the left in the Democratic Party has basically gone so far into this whole social justice, victimhood mentality that they've pretty much forgotten like things like you said about the working class and about more sensible topics that people actually care about. Like
here's a perfect example for you. And this doesn't really tie into our domestic issues, but it's foreign policy, which is kind of my forte. Cuba has put forward a new draft constitution. It does two major things. It has pulled all language about trying to achieve communism on the island. They're completely dropping that. And it will legalize gay marriage. Now, you would think that the Socialist International would come out and be kind of upset that a socialist country is giving up on their project, but they're not. Instead, they're coming out and saying that they're all happy and glad because it legalizes gay marriage. And that's an extreme example. But you see the same thing here with the Democrats, like Bill de Blasio standing up for Amazon because Jeff Bezos happens to be a social progressive, but totally ignoring the fact that the company is predatory and doesn't treat workers well, doesn't help local businesses, doesn't help smaller communities.
Well, hey guys, I got to get heading out here, unfortunately.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks for joining us, Adam.
Thanks a lot, guys.
All right.
Huh?
Oh, I was just going to ask you if you had any final thoughts about the midterms that you wanted to add before you had to jump out.
Well, I'm just happy that the Republicans in Florida won. That was a huge victory. So we'll look forward to see how this shapes things in the future. And I'll look forward to talking with you all next week.
All right. I hope your voice comes back and, feel better. So.
Will do. Thanks, guys.
It is.
Have a good evening.
You too. Likewise.
All right, gentlemen. So, Josh, it's interesting what you're saying. I mean, listen, I can't criticize Amazon too much because I'm an Amazon Prime member, and I've been putting up banners, on for my website for them. So, granted they're not perfect, but I do get what you're saying that
I'm an Amazon Prime member too. I just think that the company should be broken apart. I think we're long overdue for some good old fashioned Teddy Roosevelt trust busting. But,
well, I mean, I've argued that with Google and Facebook for years. I mean, I guess Amazon is getting to that point. At the very least, they do need to fix their KDP, their Kindle publishing service. At the very least, so maybe that should be broken up just so that they can fix that. All in all, though, I mean, I think the problem is that social justice has more or less infested the left to the point where they're not really caring about workers.
Well, they're not really caring about social justice. That term used to have a completely different meaning. If you go back to the 1930s, one of the biggest Catholic magazines in the country at the time was Father Coughlin's Social Justice magazine, and it talked about helping workers. It wasn't about social nonsense. It was originally that term referred to helping the poor and the downtrodden, but it's been totally hijacked.
Yeah, and now Father Coughlin, ironically, has been basically compared by the left to the Rush Limbaugh of the 1930s, and that is to say, they try and demonize Rush Limbaugh and Father Coughlin both as like neo-Nazi sympathizers, neither of which are true.
Father Coughlin, unfortunately, he was staunchly opposed to getting involved in the Second World War, and that led him to eventually making some rather dodgy comments on Jews, which eventually resulted in his diocese pulling him off the air and sending him back to parish work as a priest. But in his early on career, before he began to go a little bit out there, he was all right. But
yeah, when I guess with Rush, that's not, that never happened. They just scream Nazi. They just scream the word Nazi because Russia is politically incorrect, and anything that is politically incorrect is hate speech and, Nazism. That's basically that's the other thing though too. I've noticed that these terms, you talk like you keep talking about the realignment, and I mean I suppose that it's interesting that you say that because the meaning of words has kind of become realigned as well, and the meaning of terms, and not necessarily in a good way. So
I'm interested in hearing what Gabe might think about my whole thesis, but on the subject of words, I would just say, and I think Gabe already knows, I absolutely loathe the American political lexicon because it's a complete bastardization of everything that liberal in America is totally different meaning than what it means in Europe and the rest of the world.
I agree
but,
I agree with you on that. That's
a whole topic for another thing.
Gabe, what do you have to say on all this?
Well, I get it's interesting. It depends on, so the Josh's theory is that the GOP is becoming more populist, and that's true. But the thing is that both parties, the thing that makes the American electoral system unique is we only have essentially a two-party system, so they have to adopt a bunch of conflicting ideas. So every individual member of whether a Republican or Democrat is going to have their own individual ideas. I think what is more important is how do the individual voters perceive each party? So, for example, you guys talk about trust busting. I don't think we're going to see major trust busting under Trump one way or the other, because there are corporate Republicans who would never let that happen, even if the voters perceive that the Republicans are more likely to be trust busting. So I don't necessarily think the realignment is actually in the political parties' views. I think the realignment is actually how people see the political parties.
Well, it's a chicken or the egg question, because I would say that it starts with perceptions, but if perceptions aren't met after a while, then people start to get angry. Politics is, for a guy who hates markets as much as I do, I'll admit that politics is a market like anything else, and if people aren't getting what they paid for, so to speak, then they're going to go somewhere else for it. And
well, right.
So if the perception's not being met, that's what I'm saying. But,
well, right. And I think this is this is a new phenomenon. This realignment has really only occurred over the last 2 years. So I don't really think anybody, including the political parties themselves, really know what it means. Because on the one hand, for example, like you have Trump has governed like a pretty doctrinaire conservative, and yet he managed to win these voters, and now he's already indicated that he's going to start shifting back towards being a populist, whereas Democrats basically ran on as corporatistic campaign as you could get mixed in with social justice, and they won voters that aren't traditional Democrats. So that the realignment, I think, is still being felt by both parties, and they're still kind of positioning themselves to take advantage of it if they can.
I think the realignment's kind of like a tree, in that we're just now seeing in the last 2 years or so the fruits on that tree start to kind of blossom, not blossom like a flower, but they're starting to form and starting to hang from the limbs, and people are starting to take notice. But I think overall the realignment I think goes back to the end of the Cold War because with the fall of communism, Western elites didn't really have an incentive. I'll use an example. Huey Long and FDR and John Maynard Keynes came out and did all their initiatives to help the working people because it was assumed that, well, if we don't do anything for them and we just keep the status quo, eventually we're going to end up like 1917 Russia and there's going to be a revolution. And now with that threat seemingly out of the way, with us supposedly being at the end of history where liberalism had won, and as Paul Embry kind of puts it, the elites just ran wild, laissez-faire on both economic and social issues. And so now we're starting to see. I'm referencing the tweet I shared in our group chat earlier, if I didn't make that apparent enough. But and now we're sort of seeing people are calling back for, let's put the brakes on this. This is out of control. This is what we wanted. And I think we're starting to see maybe I've in foreign policy noticed it seems like the world's slowly getting into two different camps again. But I think we're starting to see a return to a more ideologically bipolar world. But like you said, we're still so early on that it's only kind of foggy. You know, we're not really sure exactly where it's all going yet.
And the thing, and the examples of the realignment in terms of election results. I mean, you can take any example like Orange County now being completely blue, or Mahoning County actually being purple. And for those of you who don't know, it's been Democratic for 100 years, and Orange County has been Republican since Hoover, to be honest. I mean, those are still relatively new, and so I know it's tempting after two elections to go, oh, this is permanent. I'll look at the new map, that this is how it's going to be. I am not 100% sure that all those changes are permanent, just because I think that the post, as you mentioned, Josh, the post-Cold War world and what it's doing to our elections, I think that hasn't fully settled yet. And I say that because this is the first midterm we've seen really since the map was realigned, and so there are a lot of variables, along with that, to say, how much of it was anti-Trump backlash, how much of it was because Trump drove out voters. It's in polling circles or statistical circles, two elections are not a lot to draw from in terms of like a sample size. So I think things are still being sorted out, even if we can sort of see an outline of what it's going to look like going forward.
I would generally agree. I have said, I don't know if I told you guys this or if I told maybe somebody else, but I predicted that I don't think we're going to see, because I think what we're settled in for the time being is sort of a protracted civil war in both parties. And with specific regard to the GOP, my prediction was that what I suspect might be the final domino that really solidifies this realignment would be if Mike Pence, who, as far as I can tell, is the most likely nominee after Trump, if Mike Pence got in, ran as a traditional Republican again, and then just got totally creamed, and that would start some kind of final, I don't know what the word I'm looking for is, some final reckoning, theological reckoning or whatever within the party, where the old guard finally has to admit that their way doesn't work. But that was my theory. My theory was that the way it would potentially end is Pence's nominee runs a traditional Reagan-esque GOP campaign, gets creamed, and then that's the end of it. But
well, I honestly think I don't think it even will take that. I think it will honestly I think it'll occur sooner. I mean, it might take something that public, but I think there'll be a bunch of smaller events that will eventually lead up to it. I mean, most people don't pay attention to politics as closely as we do, so they need that single event. But I think there'll be other things that occur along the way, smaller over time, that will sort of already indicate, that basically a traditional GOP campaign based on Reagan-esque ideas doesn't work. And I would add that Reagan was not a doctrinaire conservative, and neither even was George W. Bush. I mean, they both ran on small populist ideas, but in other words, they weren't Paul Ryan. And I think for a Republican running a national campaign, the one thing that they can take from this is that kind of campaign is not going to work anymore. The Paul Ryan kind of running a national campaign, I mean, it's basically Mitt Romney all over again.
You know, I don't want to get us off on a tangent since this is supposed to be a review of American elections. But do you have anything to say about our mirror image in the GOP's mirror image in the form of the Labour Party in the UK, Gabe? Because they seem to be having.
Well, I mean, it's so, you know, I mean, I think it's interesting that the parallels between the Tories in the UK and us, I mean, are and the GOP are kind of legion in terms of they're being propped up by people that really don't agree with them on their core ideological issues. And for the Tories, it came crashing down a couple years ago. And for the GOP, I think it came crashing down, you know, a week or two ago. But it essentially is that the elites, and this has been true of the GOP for a while, it's just kind of, they've been helped by having somebody else in the White House who isn't their own party. It's been true for a while that those who hold power in the GOP have different views than most of their voters, whether they be the grassroots Republicans, the Trump kind of Republicans who turned out and showed up in force to give the GOP the Midwest or not. Their values are different than essentially the base. And I think it's starting to creep up on them pretty quickly. Unfortunately for Theresa May, it's caught up with her. She's basically stuck between a rock and a hard place, and there is no way out other than getting squashed by the rock.
I will give her credit for being the world's longest living political zombie.
Wait, Josh, I actually have to disagree with you on that point majorly. Hillary Clinton, anyone?
I was actually going to say Angela Merkel.
No,
that too, but
I mean, for God's sakes, Hillary is talking about running for a third time now, unsuccessfully, or at least her handlers are. And you know, did anyone else see that? Did I share that?
Yeah. No, there have been articles popping up that she's going to run.
Okay.
I think if Hillary, I still think will not run. But I think the problem for Democrats is that they will run a Hillary-esque campaign on the same themes and the same kind of economic issues, and they'll think because it's not Hillary Clinton that somehow they're going to win this time.
I still am solidly sticking with my prediction that Kamala Harris comes out as the nominee. She checks off all their little boxes. She's black, she's a woman.
But she's basically Hillary Clinton all over again, which is their problem all over again, which is basically the consensus, and I've noted this in the last week or two since the midterms, the consensus among a bunch of liberal analysts who generally speak for the Democratic Party is it was Hillary Clinton. It wasn't the message. The problem is, what if it was the message? Well, so you get a few more voters on the margins, but you don't actually win a bunch of new voters because it was the issues.
Well, I would say it's actually both, and I'll have to send this clip to you guys in the non-business chat that we have on Facebook. But there's a well-known liberal comedian by the name of Jimmy Dore, and Dore, if you want to look him up, and he was on Joe Rogan's podcast about like 2 months ago now or something, talking how the modern Democrat Party and Hillary Clinton specifically is not the party of of liberalism anymore. They're just as bad at warmongering as the GOP is, supposedly. They're for things like TPP and whatnot. And quote again, I'm quoting from Jimmy Dore here, and he was saying that the Dems basically have a big problem with messaging, and then the fact that they keep dragging out Hillary Clinton, who, let's face it, I've said this for years, but the only reason why she has stuck by Bill this long is because she thinks that she's going to get some political favor out of it. And what's even more creepy to me is this latest article that her people wrote for her in the Wall Street Journal. They literally said that that she's going to win to claim her rightful place in the White House. Which is not how America works. This is not a fucking monarchy. They just can't. She can't claim her rightful place in the White House. There's an electoral process and whatnot, but yet the way they word this just goes to prove that they think that this is a by birth monarchy or something, or nepotism, or I'm not sure how to phrase it.
Well, it's as we've discussed before. It's the theory of social justice, and at some point it becomes a self-perpetuating cycle where you want social justice, or you want a woman in the White House, whatever it may be, because it's just good that thing happens. Why it's good is irrelevant. It's just good. Like, it's the ends justify the means over and over and over again. And I think that is kind of the thing that's what got Trump elected in the first place. I mean, being able to play on that. Nobody liked Trump personally, but the alternative was even worse. So if you package that in, say, a Kamala Harris or somebody else, that is still there. Nothing's changed other than the face.
I mean,
I would also add the absurdity of, again, this just goes back to my whole biff with them stealing the term social justice from the Catholic Church. But how exactly is it social justice if the woman you elect happens to also be a warmonger and a corporate stooge, and she doesn't care about poor people, and she does nothing to actually bring about justice for anybody? But because she's got a vagina, then I guess that means it's great.
That was Jimmy Dore's exact point. I'll send this to you, Josh, because I think you'll find it interesting. Now, with that being said, Dan Bongino, another podcaster I really like, said on his show earlier this week that, well, we might laugh at Hillary Clinton winning. At this point, he thinks that she's the most likely to come on top in terms of, who could be a nominee, just because she has the political machine to basically make stuff happen. Ocasio-Cortez, or whatever her name, doesn't have the wherewithal or the political clout. Neither does Elizabeth Warren. She's obliterated her political clout. And, Kamala Harris, I would say, is a maybe, but she doesn't have the machine and the infrastructure, anywhere near to the point that Hillary does. The only stipulation I would ask, and the thing I've asked myself, and I'll ask this, is, does the machine even matter anymore? The quote unquote political machine of the Clintons, or any political machine?
I'd have to know how intact it actually is at the DNC, because if I recall, the people that won the internal party offices, I'm forgetting his name. Gabe, you can remind me, who's the DNC chairman now?
Well, it was Debbie Wasserman Schultz, I think.
No, she's out. She was the Clinton stooge. Now it's some.
I don't know who it is now.
There's some guy from Minnesota. I forget his name, but he's more progressive kind of.
Yeah, Keith Perez or something like
Yep,
that.
yep. That's he's the new DNC chair. So I guess to your point, Sam, I'm not entirely sure if her machine at the DNC fully survived. Maybe it's still there, but I don't think it's near as strong as it was before. Because if you recall, right after she lost, it was revealed that she totally bankrupted the party and it was a complete mess. So I think
Well,
they've tried to weed her out. But like Gabe said, even if she's not there, the ideas still are, and that's the problem.
that might be true. Her machine might be partially damaged, but she still has more of a machine than the other Dems do, and they're not really even changing their message at all, as near as I can tell. They're still using the same values. The only way they're going to win, as far as I can see, is if they actually start to come back more towards the middle of politics.
Well,
Um,
I think the Clinton machine is unless it's changed. I think the Clinton machine actually after these last two elections is outdated, and I honestly think it's irrelevant at this point because of all the new voters that have entered the process and have voted Democrat. So unless Clinton's machine is going to be able to adapt to that and get those voters' support, I don't see how she would win. I mean, Clinton's problem was that she was such an insider and had been around so long that that even those voters who were already in the system who were younger didn't want to vote for her. So I don't know. I don't know how her machine would get those voters out for her in not just a primary but a general election. I can easily see Clinton winning every voter that she won in the primaries in 2016. She's perfectly fine for them and she's a comfort candidate. But when it comes to getting other Democratic primary voters, and there are a lot more of them since 2 years ago, to vote for her or vote for her in a general election, I think that's where her machine would fail.
I would add also that from what little I've seen about the potential for another Clinton campaign, I believe it was the Wall Street Journal. They had an article on Hillary Clinton 3.0 in which they basically suggested, or her anonymous aide suggested, that she was going to come back and she was going to be a little bit more conservative than she was last time. And I think coming back and it would be so wildly inauthentic that even people who like her would not want to support her. I mean, that's people don't like people who are obvious liars. Say what you want about Ocasio-Cortez, but there are a lot of people who admire her because she seems very authentic. So
I would even say, and don't, people are going to probably meme this or clip it to make it seem like I said I like Bernie Sanders, which I don't, but say what you will about Bernie, at least he comes off more genuine than Hillary Clinton. And the funny thing is, I think he could have won an election against Trump if it had been Bernie versus Trump. I think Bernie could have won somehow. But
I think Bernie would have probably. I don't know. I'm not sure if I'd say he would win outright, but I think because there are certain issues where his whole socialist stick doesn't really line up, like on immigration and gun control.
Well, right.
Gun control, he didn't actually go far left on that.
But I
think he would have been more challenging. Yeah.
Yeah, I think he would have done better than Hillary Clinton did. I mean, Bill Maher basically said it best after the election. Hillary needs to go into the woods and never come back.
Well, the thing is, Hillary is just a reminder for people in regards to Democrats of what they really are, which is corporatist and elitist, even as they turn around and claim to care about the poor. And that's not necessarily a huge problem in a midterm, because midterms are usually about backlashes against the president. But in a re-election, in a general election, that's an issue, because it's a choice between essentially two political parties candidates at the federal level, and those are major issues because it gets tagged to one candidate, and that's what voters perceive. And I think I think Democrats have not quite realized that to the extent that they should, because they should be taking lessons from the GOP in 2010, and they're taking the exact wrong lesson from the GOP and doing exactly what the GOP did in 2010, which was, we won, oh, we're going to beat Obama. Well, guess what? You lost because you didn't understand that the dynamic was different between each election.
I have a friend in New York who is a very liberal SJW. Well, yeah, she's SJW-ish, but she's not like the dyed her hair pink and screams and flips out at you type. She seems sane enough when you talk to her. You know, she doesn't freak out or anything.
Yeah.
But she has those diehard pro-abortion, pro-gay, LGBT, feminist, woman, year of the woman nonsense, whatever, those kind of views. And but the thing is, she's not poor. Her and her husband own a high-end clothing store. They specialize in vintage British wear, the kind of stuff you'd find at Savile Row, and very well-off couple. And I've talked to her about my realignment theory. I blew her mind when I told her about Bob Christ here in Nebraska. She couldn't comprehend a Trump-supporting Democrat nominee for governor. But no, anyways, whenever I've discussed the realignment thing with her, all she's been able to say is, well, you know, I admit there's a problem with the working class, but that's it. She can't fathom why working class people are being turned off. And the thing is, I think it's partially because she has her own class interest at play. She can't bring herself to admit that maybe people like my husband and I should pay higher taxes and should allow some people from lower income housing to come and live in our neighborhood. And maybe I should stop pushing abortion as hard as I do. And I remember I tried telling her one time, we were discussing, and I said, you know, you say you care about poor people, but are you aware that the majority of children that are aborted are from black families? They're lower income women that are having abortions. Upper income women aren't. It's poor kids that are being murdered in the womb. And I said, doesn't that seem to you like the biggest social injustice in the world, that poor children don't even get to have a shot at life? They just get aborted. And she's like, no. Abortion helps poor women. They can't comprehend the way their social stances are driving away working class people.
Well, and that's a point that Gavin McInnes makes too. He makes this quite a lot, that all these social justice warriors, all the loudest ones at least that we've seen within the past 2 to 3 years, and it's true once you look it up, all of these social justice warriors that get a lot of coverage, you look into their background at all, these are the kids who claim to be for social justice, yet their parents are usually like lawyers or attorneys, or basically, you know, they're all part of the corporate echelons and the elites of America, and these kids are preaching social justice, and yet they're, you know, driving new Cadillacs that their parents bought them, you know, every single year for their birthday.
Well, it's the luxury of their convictions, which is they are well off enough that they don't have to make the trade-offs that people have to make. I mean, the reason why the working class is not solidly Republican or Democrat is because they don't fit into either party perfectly. Say, for example, they're culturally conservative, so they don't buy the social justice warrior shtick. But they're not economic conservatives either. They don't necessarily believe that tax cuts for the wealthy is going to benefit them, so they don't fit into the Republican Party's orthodoxy either. So they are, you know, they're constantly swinging between the parties, but they're also in places that are economically struggling, or are what we like to call like the middle of nowhere. They live in those places, so nobody goes out to visit them. Like, Josh, I doubt your friend has been to rural Nebraska.
No, she just got done flying over us again to visit California. And
Your friend has probably never met anybody from rural Nebraska who has different values than she does, or can tell her like, yeah, I live on, a paycheck of $10 an hour working at like my dad's auto shop. Like, she has probably never met any of those kinds of people. And so their worldview is going to be completely foreign to her and millions of people like her.
I will admit, to her credit, it seems like the ones in New York are slightly more in touch with reality than the ones in California are. I also had a friend, no longer because she was totally insane and I got to the point I couldn't talk to her anymore. But she was of the dye your hair pink variety. And that was my first experience talking at any length with somebody from California. And it was, to me, genuinely like somebody from Mars. And I think the experience for her was the same, because I'll never forget when she's like, how on earth can you support Russia? You can't support Russia. They're murdering gay people. And I'm like, no, they're not murdering gay people.
Well, Josh, one thing you posted on Facebook the other day, which I thought was interesting, and it's something I can relate to as well, is you were talking about how, in regards to the way you dress, people don't understand the fact that, although you dress nice and you dress somewhat luxurious and stylish, people don't get that you're like middle slash, that you may be upper middle class, but you're still solid middle class, if that makes sense. But that your appearance
it's the problem of workers' representatives all over the world. I first really began noticing it with Jeremy Corbyn, and I've followed it with everybody else since. Steve Bannon got beat up all the time because he dressed like a slob. Jeremy Corbyn gets beat up all the time because he doesn't dress quite nice enough. Jean-Luc Mélenchon in France gets beat up because he won't wear a tie. And you get the impression almost that the media is just waiting. Like if Steve Bannon, when he was at the White House still, showed up one day in an Armani suit with a Brooks Brothers tie, you almost get the impression that they'd just be waiting to pounce and say, aha, you're a hypocrite. You're really the Goldman Sachs banker. We all know you really are, or whatever. Or if Jeremy Corbyn showed up and he was dressed in a little bit of a higher class, better suit instead of something from the co-op, they would pounce on him. And then on the flip side, you have Ocasio-Cortez, and I saw something about her bank statement, so maybe she's not quite as authentic as I thought. I don't know, but I'm not going to get into that right now. But you have people who do dress a little bit more nicely from the get-go, and then they're just accused of being inauthentic the whole way through. And it seems like people who want to represent workers can't win either way. It's almost, I liken it to a caste system where it's almost seemingly designed to try and say, no, you can't ever really fit in with us. You can't ever really be part of the leadership or the ruling class or whatever.
Well, that's what happens to me a lot. I get accused of being like part of the establishment in GOP because I like to, wear Banana Republic shirts and, Men's Warehouse sport coats and whatnot, which, granted aren't exactly like, they're not the same as Armani jackets, but still they're not. The fact that I basically like to dress nicely somewhat and look presentable makes me an elitist somehow. And it's like, no, I'm not an elitist. I just like to dress, nice. Just because I'm not, in a hoodie and some, torn up pair of jeans doesn't make me an elitist snob. So
as we get ready to close, Gabe, you know what I think this kind of reminds me of?
What?
I know Sam's gone on for a while about how we're the new counterculture or whatever, but it seems to me like a lot of the realignment or as the working class or as inequality has become a bigger problem, we sort of get that kind of rebel 1960s kind of thing coming in again, where people are finally sort of reassessing and realizing that, maybe back in the 60s or whatever, these abortion and gay rights movements or whatever were all the hip rebel thing to do. But now they've all been so thoroughly adopted by the establishment that if you're a real rebel, you kind of resist that stuff. I kind of joked with some friends of mine in a Catholic group about the Castro thing the Cuba Constitution change. saying like, "My God, Castro's finally been proven right." The minute that his brother steps down, the neo-colonial social justice imperialist crowd shows up and start pushing gay marriage on Cuba. If that goes through, they'll be the first country in the Caribbean to legalize it. And you can't be telling me that that's what the majority of the Cuban people want.
Well, so Josh, I guess what you're saying is that you and I are both being proven right. That I've said that conservatism is the new punk rock, and you're saying that the alignment is happening. So I guess we're having like a punk rock realignment then so to speak. That's basically what I'm hearing you say. So
I had a post on my Instagram about a year ago. Maybe I'll share it with you, Sam, or the group. But it was I think I did it in I think the reason was there was the memory. It was the commemorating Hugo Chavez's death. But I put on my red beret and my red shirt and a black zip-up sweater, and I said, if you're really a rebel today, you're not going to be supporting gun control because all these corporations that are pushing the deep inequality want to disarm the workers. If you're a rebel today, you're not going to be supporting abortion because all these corporations want women to be constantly working and not having families. If you're a rebel today, you're not going to be pushing this LGBT nonsense that's constantly used to hold people down and to push this neo-colonial agenda in Africa and elsewhere where they push contraception and everything. I shared with Gabe the other day, I think it was Denmark, they're cutting aid to Ethiopia and some of these African countries. They're cutting food off to people because these countries don't want to have gay marriage. And it's a complete joke. It's imperialism for the 21st century.
I actually read about that, and at first, I thought it was maybe a conspiracy theory, but no, it's actually happening.
There is a Catholic author. Her name is, and you can follow her on Twitter. She's Obianuju Ikichioa. I probably butchered her name. But she's a Catholic woman from Africa, and she wrote a whole book on this, and Pope Francis has actually cited it several times, where she speaks from working with Catholic organizations in Africa firsthand about the pressure that the United States State Department, the European Union, and various other Western elite organizations, be they governmental or nonprofit or whatever, the pressure they put on these African countries to push contraception, push abortion, push gay marriage, push transgenderism, and they use foreign aid they extort it with foreign aid. And it's she's referred to it as, and Pope Francis has started calling it this ideological neocolonialism or ideological colonization, where they're trying to push these progressive secular agendas onto the developing world, and they're using their unfortunate economic situations to kind of force them to do it.
It's interesting because your whole theory with realignment and kind of the working class and the snobs kind of staring at the working class makes me think of something else that happened this week. It actually happened just last night. As both of you probably know by now, Stan Lee, basically the creator of the Marvel Universe, they always called him co-creator, but let's be honest, he created all of these characters, and he created the comic book industry as we know it. He passed away at the age of 95, and I'm a pretty big comic book nerd, even beyond the movies, and I can say that for the last 40 years and beyond, comic books have kind of always been the medium of the working class, not so much man or woman, but more like, kids from the solid middle class who might not have had like a whole lot of money to go and do stuff, but comic books were a cheap, an affordable medium of entertainment, so they could get their entertainment that way. And now, obviously the comic book industry has exploded. Even so, though, I don't know if any of you guys saw this last night, but Bill Maher, one of the liberal elites out there, actually penned an op-ed on his website basically saying that Stan Lee was the reason why Trump got elected in 2016, citing that only in America could basically losers that read comic books be stupid enough to elect some fantasy figure like Donald Trump. Um, and again, who would the vast demographic of, comic book readers be? The solid middle class. So, in kind of a weird way, that goes to prove how much the elites hate the middle class as well.
I don't know. That might be a geographic thing. We didn't. I had 2 or 3 comic books when I was growing up, and I got them, I believe, at Walmart. But otherwise, there were no stores, and Walmart didn't normally carry them, which is why I think they were doing it as a Star Wars promotion. It was the General Grievous one.
Yeah,
Uh, they, there weren't a
it,
lot of places to buy comic books in Nebraska around where I was my point. I mean that today with the internet you could get it a lot, but back then we didn't. There were no stores selling. Maybe up in Lincoln and Omaha, but there were no stores around Crete or anything like that that were selling them.
well,
Uh,
maybe it is more demographic as well, but maybe it is demographic partially, but it was certainly also, at least back in the 60s and 70s, and even part of the 80s when comic books were really big, it certainly was, you know, a, a, a solid middle class thing too. Um, in bigger cities as well. Um, so and Stan Lee, even though he made lots of money off of these comic books, he still lived pretty modestly. You
Gabe,
guys, oh, go ahead.
I'll let you finish your thought. I was going to say, Gabe's probably wondering how on earth did we go from elections to comic books?
Yeah, yeah. No. My point in bringing that up was because, like I said, I mean, Bill Maher was basically the one slamming, comic book readers and saying that basically comic book readers and basically simple-minded people are the reason why this whole realignment, which he doesn't like, is happening. That's the overall point. Is that comic books are supposedly for simple-minded people, and you know that's why this whole realignment that he doesn't like is happening.
You know what we should talk about next? Well, maybe not next week, Gabe, but you know what we need to have another talk about in terms, speaking of realignments?
Mm-hmm.
We need to have a discussion again on Saudi Arabia and and their rapid fall from grace. I'd love to just sit in the room with Crown Prince Salman and his advisors on this one, because they're probably so used to killing people at this point that they're like, oh my god, we finally killed somebody and they're not letting us get away with it.
Oh yeah, with the whole I can't even remember the reporter's name.
It's interesting because everything is. I view things. I like to think I look at things like an engineer, and that everything is part of a bigger machine that's all interconnected. And so, if you follow Middle Eastern foreign policy particularly closely, like I do, you start to notice that the Khashoggi murders have sort of set off a chain reaction that has completely upended everything the Israelis have been trying to do for the last 4 or 5 years. They had been putting together what was essentially a de facto military alliance with Egypt and Saudi Arabia to counter what they thought was a growing Iranian influence in the north, and that's completely fallen apart now. There was a comic that came out today. It showed Netanyahu trying to drag a knocked out bin Salman out from a box with bloody feet and hands sticking out of it, saying, "Come on, I need you. I need your help against Iran. You need to get up." And the basic gist of it was essentially that the Israeli elections are sort of coming upon us again now as a direct result of this murder, because the Jewish Home Party and the I forget what Avigdor Lieberman's party's name is, but both of them, which are far more hardline than the Likud and Netanyahu could ever dream of being, have sort of smelled opportunity to go after Gaza now, and they pulled out of the coalition. They've resigned their cabinet posts, and they're trying to trigger a new general election, which is always fun in Israel because it's wildly unstable. But it's interesting to see how this Khashoggi thing. Long story short, I've gone on a tangent. It's interesting to see how this murder has sort of upended Israeli foreign policy overnight over there, especially because I don't think anybody expected the United States to actually get upset over it, or the Turks to exploit it the way they have, the way they've been sort of dripping out. They've got audio now of the murder, and they're only releasing it bit by bit, which makes you wonder what on earth Erdogan is thinking he's doing. But he has his own agenda for a more prominent role for Turkey in the region, and I think that's what he senses as his opportunity here. Because for the last, I'd say about 10 years or so, it's been Iran and Saudi Arabia, and I think Erdogan smells an opportunity for Turkey to reclaim regional power status there.
I mean, I would say you're more of an expert on the Middle East than I am, Josh. So I would just say you're probably right.
Well, do we have any concluding thoughts, gentlemen?
It's good to be back.
I look forward to having Adam on to discuss his thoughts on the election, because I think our next episode is also on the election.
Yeah, so our next election will, and this is just priming our viewers so they're excited for next week, or is what these election results mean for Trump and 2020.
Yeah, and I'm gonna need a whole week to think on that actually.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think we've hit on some of the themes that we'll probably discuss during that podcast, and then there'll be some individual themes as well. But ultimately, my final thoughts on it are that that I think this election was partly a continuation of a realignment. I don't think the realignment is quite done yet. But I think there were a lot of individual things that were going on in these elections that don't necessarily translate to 2020.
I'm just hoping that, God willing, Trump will be able to have a big accomplishment he can run on in 2020 as an infrastructure bill now, because I've been waiting for it seems like it's already been 4 years I've been waiting for it, but hopefully something will happen in the next 2 years and we can get some sort of deal on that, because I think the Democrat House is much more amenable to $1 trillion infrastructure bill than the GOP ever would have been.
Well, and I mean, and not to sidetrack us, but I do, in the back of my mind, I do wonder if that's why Trump is signaling some sort of support for Pelosi, because he knows that she's enough of a political animal that she would do that. I mean, she would bite at that, even if it hurt her party's prospects of winning the presidency. I think she would go for that because it would maintain her power, because she'd get something out of it.
I just hope that our politicians, maybe I'm being too idealistic, but I would hope that they're putting the best interests of the country first as well, because we badly need infrastructure updates here. It's getting terrible. I watched a thing on John Oliver about 2 years ago about the state of our bridges, and it was almost like a horror show. Watching the inspection crews go out there and say how badly these things need renovated, or people are going to die eventually.
Well, I would also say, in regards to the whole thing with Pelosi and and that whole thing, the Dems always accuse Trump of not wanting to work with anyone or be bipartisan, right? Nancy Pelosi is widely regarded by many on the left as like one of the most dyed-in-the-wool, liberal Democrats. So if Trump can actually work something out with Pelosi, he could actually, during the campaign say, well, hey, I did work with Pelosi on this, so I'm not the evil Nazi that you guys think I am. Not that that will change much, because they'll still call him a Nazi, that at least the press will and the elites. But I certainly think if he does work with Pelosi, it will lend a lot more kind of credence to him as president, maybe among some skeptics. I don't know. Maybe I'm being too hopeful, and maybe I'm being a Trump fanboy, but that's what I'm hoping for, at least anyway. So.
Well, with that, gentlemen, or Josh, did you give your final thoughts?
No, that was my final thought. I thought
All
that was
righty.
my final thought.
I thought that was my final thought.
Maybe that's what I should rename this episode. I thought that was my final thought. So, but anyway, well, folks, I think we've had our fair share of final thoughts and whatnot. Not to copy Tommy Lahren or anything, but anyway, that will do it for this week's episode. It's great to be back, and we'll be back next week. Same bat channel, same bat place. If you're listening to this on Apple Podcasts or iTunes, don't forget to leave us a 5-star rating if you like this show, and please help us, boost the rating for the show. We really appreciate it. Thank you for watching on YouTube and or listening on iTunes, and we'll be back next week. Thanks for listening, and God bless.